Giselle Hartman stepped from her graphite Porsche, her eyes locking onto the vehicle 2 spaces over. Over the decades, its bright red paint had faded into a dull, dried blood hue. A jagged crack marked the rear window, and the chrome trim had lost its shine completely. The man climbing out wore faded work pants and a simple, unbranded cotton shirt. His hair was messy, his hands rough and calloused from years of real labor. Giselle let the quiet drag out, making sure the awkward pause was totally deliberate. Then she spoke up, projecting her voice so the whole parking garage would listen. "I thought the city had strict laws about dumping abandoned vehicles." The bystanders chuckled at that, but the man stayed silent. He just opened the back door, lifting out a 7-year-old girl who hugged a model engine to her chest. Not a single person in that garage realized what lived beneath all that rust. Nobody except him. Stick with me here. What lived under that hood will change how you and I view everyone we ever underestimated. The vintage car always sat parked on the short gravel street right beside his house. Wyatt kept it for 11 years, inheriting the ride the winter his dad passed away. And through all those years, he never once thought about repainting that worn exterior. On the surface, it looked completely abandoned. At least, that is what unkind strangers always assumed when they walked by. That original factory red had slowly oxidized into a dark, patchy, rust-colored brown over time. A shallow dent scarred the back panel right above the rear wheel well. The long chrome strip tracing the passenger side had lost its brilliant shine. The hood badge, once legendary to anyone who truly understood the beauty of Italian engineering, had faded so badly that average folks simply could not recognize the brand anymore. You and I know better. While most saw a rusty problem, Wyatt looked and saw his father. Luna pulled the heavy passenger door open, climbing inside and resting her engine model on her lap. She stared through the cracked windshield while Wyatt finally started the motor. And that motor, that brilliant, secret, absolutely impossible machine inside. It roared to life with a deep, steady power that proved true value lies in pure craftsmanship, not a shiny shell. "Are we driving past the fountain today?" Luna asked him. "We are heading past the Hartman building," Wyatt told her. "Your school is hosting the science fair in their courtyard this year. Remember that?" "Oh," she murmured softly. Then a beat later, "Can we still visit the fountain?" "If we get there early," and they certainly had time. The Hartman building loomed over the Western Financial District, 12 stories of slick glass and cold, dark steel. It was the sort of place built purely to show off power, screaming success before you even read the sign. Hartman and Associates commanded the top 3 penthouse floors. The firm gave advice on massive investments and corporate buyouts. They judged the true worth of companies across North America and Western Europe. On paper, the business was an absolute triumph. A 34-year-old woman named Giselle Hartman ran the entire show. She grew it from a tiny subleased room into a powerhouse wealth firm that dominated the financial magazines almost every single week. That morning, Giselle was already taking her 3rd business call before finishing her latte. She always drove herself. She viewed it as a strict marker of personal discipline. Her ride was a flawless graphite Porsche Cayenne, kept on a strict service contract and washed every week. She loudly defended this belief, never looking past the surface. She assumed how someone polished their material possessions was a direct, flawless window into how they handled their actual real-world jobs. The wealthy CEO built this shallow rule in her 20s, back when she started her business from scratch and desperately needed quick ways to judge people. She never once paused to look deeper beneath the surface. To her, the truth seemed obvious. Take Carter Blake, her chief financial officer. Waited by the glass doors as she pulled up, he clutched 2 folders and his morning coffee. His tight, nervous grip proved he had been standing there waiting forever. Carter was 41, sharply dressed, and totally terrified to disagree with his boss about anything that might threaten his high-status job. He was a useful, shiny tool. Giselle saw right through him, even if she rarely admitted his cheap loyalty out loud. Meanwhile, Diana Walsh was already upstairs quietly working. Diana was 30 and had run Giselle's chaotic life as her assistant for almost 4 years. She was quiet, highly organized, and held a deep precision Giselle prized but never truly grasped. Diana never filled quiet rooms with empty chatter, and she refused to fake a laugh just to please the boss. Giselle simply filed these traits away as good office skills. She never bothered looking deeper to see the real, complex woman hiding behind the desk. Diana's aging father, Harold Walsh, was 68. He had spent 4 decades hunting hidden value as a master restorer of classic vintage cars. He finally retired to a quiet western Massachusetts home, hiding 3 classic auto projects inside a dusty old barn. He got weekly calls from Diana about normal life stuff, well, at least until very recently. Let's step into the garage together. That morning, Giselle spotted the rusted car before the driver, sitting right in the visitor lot, inches from her reserved space. It stopped her completely cold in the exact way that expensive, flashy luxury cars naturally stun normal people. Not because it looked gorgeous. To her, it looked ruined. It sat low to the ground, the rusty peeling paint clearly hiding a much richer past. The back window even showed a tiny crack in the bottom corner. You couldn't guess its true age at first glance, which made it a rare mystery. Most vintage vehicles scream their era. This neglected machine kept its secrets. Giselle climbed out of her sleek Cayenne, glaring at it. Then her judging eyes shifted to the single dad stepping out. He was maybe 37. He had thick, calloused forearms built by honest, heavy labor, not a fancy health club, just wearing faded work pants and a simple gray tee. His messy hair desperately needed trimming. To her, he just looked like a random blue-collar guy dropping off a package, asking about a delayed shipment, or picking up some boring paperwork. He didn't look, to our CEO, like a man who belonged anywhere near her corporate headquarters. He reached gently into the back, lifting out his little daughter. The girl was hugging a tiny model car engine tightly. Her yes-man Carter suddenly appeared, scurrying over from the glass lobby. He stared down the rusty car. We've all seen this smug look. He smiled, waiting for his boss to say exactly what he was thinking. Giselle took the bait. Is that garbage actually parked here? She sneered loudly. Let's step into that empty morning parking garage together, where every little sound echoed sharply off the cold concrete pillars. A few early arrivals paused and glanced over. I was pretty sure this was a private executive garage. The single dad stood tall, holding his little girl. He just stared back at the wealthy CEO. No anger or shame in his eyes, just solid like a quiet mountain that doesn't care if you judge its rough exterior. We have a visitor pass, he replied in a calm voice. Science fair. The school rented the east courtyard today. Giselle circled the rusty old car slowly, using the exact same predatory walk she used when tearing apart a weak business pitch. Her sharp heels echoed loudly on the floor. She judged the faded hood, the flaking chrome, and the battered side panels. She stared at the completely worn-off classic car badge. What even is this junk? She spat the question out, clearly not caring about the actual history of the vehicle. This belongs in a museum, a really sad one, Carter chuckled. A couple of junior staff heading for the elevator stopped to watch. The father stayed totally silent. He placed his daughter carefully on the ground, kneeled down to her eye level, and whispered something. The little girl nodded. She turned her face away from Giselle, but the tense angle of her tiny shoulders screamed of quiet shame, making at least one observer in that garage feel a sudden, sharp pang of regret. That uneasy observer was Diana. She had just come downstairs to return a folder Giselle left in her luxury SUV the night before, and she reached the edge of the garage just in time to hear the entire ugly exchange. She froze there, clutching the folder tightly, just watching them. I think we should head inside, she told Giselle. Her voice was flat and perfectly neutral. Giselle glared at her, looked back at the weathered classic car, and then scoffed at the father who was holding his daughter's hand. Enjoy your little science fair, Giselle smirked. The fake sweetness in her tone only made it crueler. Wyatt gave a single nod. Thanks. He said it totally flat, like he was just confirming the weather forecast before turning to walk his little girl toward the main courtyard doors. Luna never looked back at them, but as she walked, she whispered a quiet question that only her dad was meant to catch. And it broke his heart. Daddy, did that lady hate our car? Wyatt just squeezed her tiny hand tighter and stayed silent, knowing perfectly well that some painful questions don't really need a spoken answer. Diana lingered in the quiet garage for a second after Giselle finally strutted back inside. She stared at the neglected vehicle. While Giselle was busy mocking it, she noticed the hood wasn't actually latched all the way down. Pretty common for vintage vehicles, the secondary safety catch worn completely smooth. The gap was tiny, maybe an inch, but in that bright morning light, it was plenty. She caught a quick glimpse deep inside the engine bay. You and I know that looks deceive, and the pristine mechanics hiding in there totally shattered the illusion of this rusty shell. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of that narrow gap, capturing the flawless metal beneath. The rare custom component setup was unmistakable to trained eyes. Then she slipped the phone away, walked inside with her folder, and kept the incredible secret entirely to herself. Later that evening, after Giselle finally left, and Carter went home, and the corporate office was practically a ghost town. Let's look closer. Diana sat at her kitchen table, zooming in on that laptop photograph. Behind her sat her father's old, heavy reference books, rare volumes covering vintage European automobiles, uncovering hidden mechanics, lost marks, and secret auto history. The exact books you find when someone spends an entire career obsessed with uncovering true automotive value. She grabbed one, hunting through illustrations to match that strange engine configuration hiding in that rusty car's photo. Then she dialed her dad. Harold Walsh picked up on the second ring, just like he always did, deep inside whatever dusty corner of the barn he occupied that night. "I have a question," Diana told him, "about an engine." Over the line, a heavy metal tool clattered against a workbench. "Go ahead," she detailed the secret mechanics she had spotted. That weird intake manifold configuration, the bizarre routing of those oil lines, the distinct shape of the valve covers. Details totally invisible in modern production, and vastly different from any classic car restoration piece she had ever seen. Harold stayed completely silent for a long time. "The oil lines?" he finally asked. "You said they run in a V shape off the secondary block?" "Yes." "And the valve covers are ribbed lateral ribs, not longitudinal?" "Yes." More dead silence. "Then, Diana, where did you see this car?" she explained. He went totally quiet again. "It could be nothing," he cautioned. "Could be a clever custom build by an expert. But if it is what I suspect, assuming that rusty chassis actually matches, and if that engine has real provenance, that scrapped car holds true value completely hidden beneath its ugly surface. What do you actually think it is?" He whispered his theory, and she carefully scribbled the priceless vintage name onto her notepad. Beside her laptop, she stared at that incredible hidden truth for a long time before speaking another single word. Early the next morning, she tracked down Wyatt Cole in the East Courtyard, grabbing his kid after the school science fair wrapped up. Little Luna took second place, clutching a ribbon that was actually red, even though she stubbornly called it blue. Wyatt listened deeply to her breakdown of the judge's methods with the deep respect of a man who actually valued a 7-year-old's complex technical arguments. Diana carefully approached him at a respectful distance, giving this underestimated father plenty of time to notice her before she intruded. "Mr. Cole," she halted a few feet back, "I want to apologize for yesterday morning. The things said in that parking garage were incredibly rude. I am sorry you faced that." He studied her for a moment, projecting that exact same quiet, unhurried strength he showed the day before. "You weren't the one who said anything." "I know, but I stood there." He weighed this, nodding slightly. "You and I know he saw the hidden value in her distinction." "Your daughter is quite brilliant," Diana noted. Staring closely at the complex model engine, little Luna now flashed at a totally confused stranger passing by the courtyard. "That is a real build. Most kids just tape posters." "She built it entirely herself," Wyatt replied. "I only showed her the manual once." "I noticed your car's engine yesterday," Diana mentioned, carefully studying his face for a hidden reaction. "Your engine, that specific configuration. I actually know my stuff. My dad did classic auto restoration for 40 years. Wyatt's calm mask shifted slightly. It was not exactly surprise. "Think about it. That sharp alertness when your hidden worth is finally recognized in an unexpected place." "You know about engines?" he asked, a little. "Enough to spot that your vintage car's setup isn't standard." He studied her quietly, searching beneath the surface. She held his gaze without flinching. "Let's look closer," because that silent strength alone convinced him to make his next move. He walked to the rusty vehicle, which was still parked in the visitor section, and he popped the hood. Diana stepped closer, peering deep inside the engine bay. A long, heavy silence fell over her. She shifted slightly, letting the sunlight catch the hidden details. Leaning in, she focused on the back left side of the block, right where the shadows broke. Hiding in plain sight were letters inscribed in what looked like faded white paint marker or an old pen. The strokes were deliberate, unhurried. A signature she knew instantly, not from real life but from a copy printed in her dad's classic car book, a famous mark that sat right on the front page as a chapter header. A priceless piece of history quietly preserved. She slowly stepped back. She didn't even realize she had raised a hand to cover her mouth until she felt her own trembling fingers pressed against her lips. "Is this genuine?" she whispered. "Yes," Wyatt replied quietly. "Do you realize what this classic vehicle is worth?" He stared at the motor like he always did, not judging its cash value, not claiming ownership, but like sharing a quiet conversation with an old friend. "I don't look at it like that." That evening, Diana phoned her dad again, eager to reveal the hidden treasure she found, and Harold Walsh sat silently in his Massachusetts barn. The pause stretched on so long she actually thought the line had dropped. Then he just breathed, "Good Lord," followed by, "That man has to protect that machine." Diana smiled. "I think he already is." Exactly 3 weeks passed. The firm needed an independent appraisal expert for the United States side of a massive deal. You and I see how worlds collide. The client was Marco Gentile, an Italian collector buying up vintage auto assets since the 1950s. He was relocating a chunk of his fleet to the States. He needed a true expert with absolutely no hidden financial motives involved. Someone whose reputation in the industry was bulletproof. Someone whose eye for true value both sides trusted. Every single independent source Carter checked pointed to the exact same guy, Wyatt Cole. Carter dropped the file onto Giselle's desk that Thursday afternoon, skipping the useless small talk entirely. She stared closely at the photo on the cover. Just a standard corporate headshot, typical for elite consulting registries. But she knew that face, the single dad from the lot. He is ranked top 5 for independent classic car appraisals on pre-1970 European vehicles across the East Coast, Carter explained. Elite collectors in Paris and Milan demand him. No fancy agency, he works totally solo, strict word of mouth. Giselle just stared at the folder. This deal was so massive that blowing the car valuation would destroy their ties with the Gentile family, a prized whale they had been quietly chasing for 2 solid years. As we're about to see, getting this right unlocked a European collector network that raw money couldn't ever buy. "Set up the meeting," she ordered softly. Diana finally made the call. Wyatt answered. He listened quietly, saying absolutely nothing for a long beat when Diana dropped the firm's wealthy name. She held her breath. "All right," he finally said. "Send the asset list. I'll see you Thursday." "You and I know" looks deceive. Thursday, 2 in the afternoon, same battered car. He parked in standard visitor spots, wearing a simple jacket over a plain white shirt. The man wasn't dressed to impress. He dressed like a man with real purpose, seeing absolutely no need to fake importance with an expensive wardrobe. 8 people waited in that 9th-floor conference room when he walked in. Giselle commanded the head chair. Carter flanked her right, with 3 polished associates lining one side. Diana sat quietly in the corner, notepad ready, and 2 sharp representatives from the Gentile management team anchored the far end. Wyatt took his seat, opened his simple folder, and spoke for 45 minutes. He broke down the classic car collection's records with genuine expertise that needed zero flash. The chassis numbers, production dates, and the hidden gaps in ownership history he spotted, along with the exact methods he used to uncover the truth. He detailed the one vintage vehicle hiding fake paperwork, laying out solid proof for his bold conclusion. He wasn't preaching at them. He merely shared deep facts, speaking with the quiet authority of a man who spent 20 years mastering his craft. Carter silently filled 3 pages with notes. Giselle stayed completely silent for 45 minutes, highly unusual for her. Usually, she dominated meetings with her loud corporate persona, interrupting constantly to steer things her way, projecting power by ensuring her voice was always the loudest in the room. Yet she just sat and listened, never interrupting even once. When Wyatt finally finished, the clients exchanged a knowing glance. They saw his real worth. Carter shifted to discussing fee structures. Giselle stayed behind as everyone left. Diana packed up slowly, sensing the room's shift, realizing she should stay close but out of sight. The wealthy CEO stared at Wyatt across the empty boardroom table. He just capped his pen, completely ignoring her gaze. His relaxed posture proved he needed absolutely zero validation from this powerful woman. "The other morning," she said. He glanced up. "I wasn't." She choked. "You and I know polished executives rarely fumble their lines." She tried again. "What I said in the parking garage was truly unkind. I said it publicly, making it far worse." She paused. "I am telling you directly, without a corporate shield. I was wrong." Wyatt studied her with that exact steady depth she saw by his rusty car. Not aggressive, not weak, just perfectly grounded and real. "I appreciate that," he said softly. "That's all?" Carter had questioned her earlier when she admitted she wanted to apologize face to face. He offered it as a simple caution, like owning your mistake somehow damages your polished corporate value. She ignored his shallow advice. "I have a young daughter," Wyatt stated. He shut his file. "She asked me that night if people hated our rusty car. She is 7. She shouldn't have to absorb someone's bad morning mood." The heavy truth landed. Giselle froze. There was absolutely nothing left to fake. "But yes," the single dad added, "that is all." He stood up, grabbed his simple folder, and walked straight out. Diana watched him leave, then studied Giselle, who sat staring blankly at the polished surface of the boardroom table with an expression Diana had never seen before, a sudden vulnerability she could not immediately name. 2 weeks passed. The high-end Gentile valuation event opened at a Back Bay hotel. The grand ballroom was lavishly arranged just for the flashy occasion. Let's look past the polished vehicles on display, past the pristine paperwork framing the walls. Wealthy buyers and elite auto specialists swarmed the floor. This flashy event drew wealthy CEOs holding rare treasures that regular single parents didn't possess. They never got to see it. The exclusive coverage strictly targeted a tiny elite crowd obsessed solely with outward perfection and shiny surfaces. Wyatt pulled up at 7:45 in the morning, eager to finish his early checks before the superficial crowd arrived. He drove his rusty beater. A 20-year-old parking attendant judged the vehicle's ugly exterior. He watched the rusted eyesore approach, completely horrified. You could see him doing the math, trying to figure out if he could legally reject the trashy ride. Wyatt simply handed over his parking slip for the VIP expert spots. The snobby kid just glared at it, then silently waved him through. Inside, the polished illusion was complete. Carter barked orders, fixing the final display stands with the frantic, obsessive energy of a guy grinding away since 6 in the morning. Diana, a snobby, wealthy executive, haughtily directed venue staff near the doors. 3 eager photographers from top car magazines prepped their shiny cameras along the eastern wall. At 8:30, Marco Gentile rolled up in a genuinely remarkable piece of automotive history. A pristine 1963 ride, kept alive with the obsessive care that only springs from a deep, authentic appreciation for hidden inner beauty. He was a short, white-haired man, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had long since stopped caring about superficial status, finding massive freedom in that unpolished reality. He wore a plain dark suit, no flashy smartphone in sight anywhere. Stepping out, he briefly chatted with his driver before turning toward the hotel's grand entrance, ignoring the shallow pomp around him. He would have strolled right inside if a hidden gem hadn't interrupted. Wyatt's rusty old vehicle sat parked right by the accessible doors, isolated from the shiny VIP rides, but Marco Gentile froze the absolute second his expert eyes hit it. Dead in his tracks. The way you and I stop when sudden recognition hits, forcing the entire body to halt and process the hidden truth. He slowly approached the scrapyard-ready car. His personal assistant, 12 years on the job and rarely ever caught off guard by anything at all, watched him pivot without a single word. She trailed behind, totally confused by his sudden, inexplicable detour. Marco stood squarely in front of the rusted frame, staring at it for a while. He paced around it, carefully analyzing the battered lines and the exact shape of the hood. He crouched to examine the precise angle of the dirty front wheel wells. Standing up, he judged its side profile one more time before murmuring softly in Italian. His assistant whispered a translation, even though nobody else was around to catch the secret. He claimed he actually knew that unique hood. He had spotted the original engineering blueprints for this exact setup decades ago, hidden away among Secret papers his father kept buried in their Maranello home. The snobby CEO Diana stepped outside watching this unfold in pure disbelief. She rushed inside, found the single dad Wyatt, and bewilderedly whispered that Marco Gentile was hovering beside his scrapyard-ready car outside, looking utterly captivated by the rusted, forgotten machine. Wyatt ditched his coffee and walked straight out. Carter had already followed, along with two curious photographers, sniffing out a story. So what do we take from this? True worth isn't shiny. Marco Gentile treated an ugly rusted relic with the deep reverence he usually saved for verified million-dollar masterpieces. Giselle came out dead last. She cut a call short the second Diana appeared in the doorway and delivered her message. With that tight, guarded tone she saved for massive hidden surprises, "You should come outside." Marco turned at the approaching footsteps. He spotted Wyatt walking up, recognizing the quiet single dad from their work those past few days. "This is yours," Marco stated bluntly. It was not a question. "It was my father's," Wyatt replied quietly. Marco studied the rusty exterior. He rested one hand softly on the weathered fender, showing zero greed. Instead, he touched the metal like greeting an old friend. "Your father," he murmured. "Where did he work?" "He was a mechanic." Maranello 1972, a technical exchange program for just one single season. Marco's face shifted, masking a deep shock that was hard to read from afar. "You and I know that look, profound awe, like a man rewriting a deep truth he'd held for decades." "There was a hidden program," Marco whispered slowly, uncovering a buried memory. "My father mentioned it. American and German automotive engineers, just a small group. They built a rare prototype series that never saw mass production." "This is one of them," Wyatt revealed. Marco just stared at him in silence. Then he quietly asked, "May I see the engine?" Wyatt glanced around at the superficial crowd forming nearby. Carter faking importance with his folders, and photographers with cameras half raised, blind to the real value. Giselle stood completely frozen a step behind the rest, watching. Wyatt unlocked the door and popped the hood. Marco stepped closer. He moved slowly, showing profound respect for the machine rather than old age. And he leaned into the dusty engine bay with the absolute devotion that others reserved. For priceless museum masterpieces, rare first editions, or faces they desperately wanted to remember. Drawing a tiny penlight from his jacket, he scanned the buried metal with extreme precision and the space. We can both agree that parking lot became absolutely, breathlessly silent. The beam hit the left side of the block. Marco Gentile stood up perfectly straight. He pressed his palms flat against the dirty edge of the bay for a second. And the trembling stillness of his hands spoke louder than anything that superficial crowd had witnessed lately. He muttered one sentence in Italian. His voice was mostly steady but barely holding together. His assistant translated in a hushed whisper, though several bystanders were close enough to catch both voices. "He says there's a hidden signature. He says he recognizes the exact handwriting. He has seen this exact script on a sacred document, an original file. Deep in the Maranello Company archives, dating to 1971. One clueless photographer finally raised his waiting camera. Another had already been filming the revelation for the past 45 seconds. Carter muttered something shallow to Giselle in an undertone. She completely tuned him out. She was staring at the rusty block, but from her privileged angle, she couldn't actually spot the secret signature. But she saw Marco Gentile's face, and she saw Wyatt's, and the stark contrast between them was revealing. Marco's face held the stunned joy of a man rediscovering a priceless treasure he thought was gone forever, while Wyatt's held absolutely nothing new. He always knew the truth. He'd carried that hidden value. There wasn't a single emotion on his face that hadn't been resting there for 11 years. What do we learn? Giselle suddenly remembered her own mocking voice echoing loudly off the concrete. Look closely with me at that little girl with the toy engine, asking her dad a hushed question as they vanished. She reflected on the superficial word she had weaponized, sad. A heavy, unseen guilt washed over her. She didn't try to brush away that raw, uncomfortable truth. She let that profound feeling remain undisturbed, knowing it was the absolute bare minimum she owed the truth. Within 2 days, those revealing photographs were spreading through elite collector magazines and the everyday mainstream press. That faded signature was proven real by a top analyst hired by two separate magazines, and an expert who spent 20 years studying the deepest layers of Ferrari archives. The unseen truth was undeniable now. Wyatt's phone rang endlessly all week. The biggest bid surfaced from a secretive buyer in Switzerland. A seven-figure fortune that Wyatt kept deeply private, though Diana, digging through the quiet gossip of her industry, eventually discovered exceeded $4 million. Other massive bids arrived, mostly buried behind thick layers of middlemen. Some clearly came from wealthy people desperate to keep their true identities perfectly hidden. Wyatt found this superficial secrecy completely irrelevant. He quietly rejected everything. Soon the frantic noise faded away into total silence. Carter vainly tried to position his agency as the slick middleman to profit off the underlying gold mine. Wyatt shut him down with a pure, quiet politeness that left absolutely no room to argue. Carter pushed anyway, totally missing the point. Wyatt calmly refused again, burying the matter completely beneath an unbothered surface. Little Luna uncovered the real news on a friend's glowing tablet, shared through whatever digital whispers reached the 12 and under crowd. She walked inside, backpack heavy, clutching the glowing screen. She stopped right at the kitchen's edge, staring past the obvious. "Dad, our car is famous." Wyatt was quietly preparing dinner. He calmly turned, glanced at the flashy headline, and just handed it back. "It's not new to us," he murmured. "Are you going to sell it?" He studied her deeply for a quiet moment. "Do you want me to?" She weighed this with profound, 7-year-old gravity, a pure inner depth that is incredibly moving to witness. She dropped her heavy bag and climbed up onto the wooden stool. "No," she finally whispered, "because it's Grandpa's." Wyatt faced the stove again, guarding the unspoken. "That's right." A week later, Giselle drove out to seek the real man behind the address in his registry. The quiet route led to a residential area northwest of the city, filled with humble homes that hid rich lives. The lawns were either perfectly manicured or wildly overgrown, showing no middle ground on the surface. Wyatt's quiet home was the latter. It was a space where profound care was poured into unseen details, rather than just the superficial grass. She left Carter behind. She intentionally left Diana behind, too. She gripped a small bakery box picked up along the way. Sitting in her car, she silently swore this simple offering was genuine, not some shallow theatrical prop. This couldn't be a fake corporate performance. You and I know she had to face her own true motives, or this whole apology meant absolutely nothing. Beneath the cardboard, it really wasn't a prop. She sincerely bought those pastries simply because she had no idea how to face a man she had so publicly, superficially judged with completely bare hands. And the small box felt like a truly honest confession of her quiet shame rather than some hollow, calculated strategy. "You and I know appearances deceive." She knocked. Wyatt answered, completely unsurprised. The CEO wondered if Diana warned him, though she guessed she hadn't. She realized he was just a man who kept his reactions buried deep beneath a calm exterior. "I wanted to come myself," she told him, "not through anyone else." He stepped back. Taking the silent cue as an invitation, she finally walked right inside. The modest house was spotless, holding the careful cleanliness of someone who clearly did not have much extra room, yet arranged everything they owned with quiet, deliberate care. Books lined a low shelf. A little girl's crayon drawing hung on the fridge alongside a faded photograph on the windowsill, one she barely glanced at before looking away again. The faint scent of motor oil hung in the air, a hidden signature she now tied to him, suddenly feeling perfectly right. She set the bakery box down. "I want to say this very clearly," she said. "What I did back in that parking garage was a cruel public insult for no reason that actually mattered. That old car's surface value meant nothing in the end, and your little girl saw everything." She paused. "I've been agonizing over that part the most." Wyatt glanced from the pastry box back up to her face. "She's doing fine," he replied. "I know, but your daughter asked you something as she walked away." "I saw it happen." He didn't bother to confirm or deny the observation. He merely watched her with a steady calm that she finally realized wasn't an empty absence of emotion, but rather the quiet proof of a deeply grounded, unbreakable spirit. "Luna will be fine," he stated plainly. "She already is, I know. People always judge the surfaces they don't understand," he added then. "I've done it myself, to different things to other people. It's just worth remembering. Like you and I often find, he wasn't lecturing her at all. He spoke it as a raw truth about all humanity, firmly including himself in the flaw. Giselle's eyes fell to the simple box on the table. Then her gaze caught the framed windowsill photo, a man sharing Wyatt's features, clearly his father. Standing beside that very same rusted vintage car in a sunny yard, beaming at whoever snapped the picture. "Who took that old picture?" she asked. She didn't fully grasp why she cared. "My mother," Wyatt answered, 1973. He had just returned from Italy. She studied the fading image for another long second. The man inside the frame was laughing hard, pure, unguarded joy that completely overtakes a face before you can even stop it. His heavy hand rested proudly on the hood. Giselle finally turned back to face Wyatt. "Your dad really loved that car," she said. "He loved what rebuilding the engine taught him," Wyatt replied. "That vehicle was living proof. He always claimed he never just built parts, he learned life lessons, and those hard lessons left behind a solid shape. The car was that shape." The wealthy CEO had absolutely no response. She wasn't entirely sure a response was even necessary here. She slowly lifted the pastry box off the wooden table and offered it to him. "Luna will enjoy these treats," she offered. "There's a tiny one packed inside with pink icing. The bakery clerk promised me it was their absolute best flavor." Wyatt quietly accepted the box. A subtle shift rippled across his rough face, not quite total forgiveness exactly. Since true forgiveness demanded an emotional ledger neither was keeping right now. It was something deeper. "What you and I are seeing is just two people, moving past a broken start, quietly agreeing to let the real journey begin." "She'll eat the frosting first," he said. "She always does." Giselle said her goodbyes and headed back to her car. She sat there for a minute before firing up the engine, staring out at the gravel driveway, the house, and that slightly open garage door. Inside that dark space sat the front edge of a very familiar beaten-up vehicle. For 10 years she built her life around one rigid rule. You and I might question this, but she believed the outside equaled the inside, that a polished surface meant real depth. She thought about that rusty car, how she missed its true worth and drove home. Later that evening Wyatt stood in the garage. Outside was quiet and so was little Luna. She was fast asleep, but the deepest silence, that was right inside him. A heavy stillness that moved in the day his father died and never packed up. Though over the years, he learned how to sit with that ache without flinching. He popped the hood, not to tinker with belts or check the oil. He did it simply because it was his quiet evening ritual. The long day was over, the dishes were drying, the house was dark, and this old car was his absolute private sanctuary. He stood by the engine block, looking at it the exact same way that people stare at faded photos of loved ones they can't ever reach again. Little Luna first laid eyes on that hidden signature 3 days after the hotel drama. Let's step back to that moment. He popped the hood, crouched down, and aimed his flashlight right at the engine block. She leaned right in, resting both little hands on the greasy edge of the bay. Leaving tiny handprints he refused to wipe away for a whole week. She studied those cursive letters with that fierce focus she saved for things that truly mattered. The letters looked like a river, she had told him. He was confused at first. Then he took another look and suddenly he knew exactly what she meant. She touched the famous signature with a single finger, incredibly lightly. Then she looked back up with those clear eyes of a kid who just heard a deep truth and felt it in her bones. "Grandpa knew him?" she asked. "They worked together one season. Your grandfather was very good at what he did. That's why." Luna chewed on that thought. "So it's not just a signature," she said. "It's saying your grandfather was great." Wyatt stared down at his young daughter for a moment. "Yes," he told her quietly, "that's exactly what it is." Back in the present, he shut the hood in the quiet evening air, using that same deliberate care. Both hands unhurried. He pressed until the metal latch clicked into place with a small, solid, and final sound. The forgotten car sat in the dark garage, pure rust on the outside, pure silk inside, and right between those two layers. A hard proof of a working man, recognized for his craft by someone whose respect actually meant everything. A quiet honor his son carried for 11 years, never bragging to a single soul. Because we know the truth, real value doesn't need witnesses. Down the hall Luna was fast asleep. That little model engine she built sat on her shelf, right beside a prized ribbon that was technically red. The window was cracked just enough for the late spring breeze to drift inside. barely moving her curtains. Wyatt finally flipped off the garage light and walked slowly back inside. All the day's judgment was finally over. Under the hood, the real truth of it all remained unchanged. The house was quiet, hiding a peace that was enough.